Hi, welcome back to Meraki Unboxed. My name's Simon and I am the host of the show. It's so good to have you back here again in these very difficult times. We know that everybody out there is having to make compromises in many different ways, and we are doing our very best to keep things going on this podcast, which is brought out every couple of weeks. And you can find it on your favorite podcast app. You can also find it on YouTube. And we would definitely love you to be a subscriber. There's plenty of great content, so I'd love you to go back and have a listen to some of the previous episodes. A lot of that content is still absolutely still relevant today. So one of the ways that we can get you involved as well is to use the Meraki community, and we love you to do that. That's a great way to share the conversation in between the shows and also to get ideas for what we can bring to you next. So if you go to community.meraki.com, sign up if you don't have an account already. We would love to get you on there and participating in this show. All right, so today's episode is going to be diving into the world of APIs. We've done this a couple of times. We've actually had some very successful shows we've done previously on the Meraki APIs, which are really starting to open the platform up for different kinds of uses to some of the ones you might be thinking of, all sorts of innovative ways our technology is being used. And we wanted to dive into some more details on that today. And I'm actually joined by a fabulous crowd of Merakians today who are going to help us with a conversation on that exact topic. So first of all, we'll start off with some introductions and then we'll get into the conversation. So let's see now. First of all, I have Melissa. Hi, Melissa. How are you doing today?
Hi, Simon. I'm doing well. Thanks.
And what do you do for Meraki?
I'm the product marketing manager for our cloud platform team.
And where are you calling in from today? I know we're all scattered all around the globe on this one.
I'm in just around San Francisco.
Okay, so we're keeping it local so far. Next up, we'll kick it over to Corey Gwynn. How are you doing, Corey?
Yeah, hi there. I'm doing all right.
And you're much further away, right? You're other side of the Atlantic.
That's it. So I'm in Amsterdam, and I'm a solutions architect on the API product team. So I'm doing a lot of stuff with the testing, design, and really just leveraging how the API can be used to better enhance the Meraki experience.
Okay. And last but not least, we have Mr. Tony Carmichael. Tony, check in.
Yes. Hey, everyone. Hi, Simon. Thanks for having us today.
And what do you do for Meraki, Tony?
Yeah, so I'm a product manager for our API and developer platforms at Meraki, and I'm hailing to you from Denver, Colorado, here in the mountain time zone.
Beautiful. What's the weather like over there today?
You know, today it decided to be beautiful, warm, and sunny, which is perfect for this recording here.
Loving the sound of that. And well, we're all looking forward to getting some fresh air as soon as we can, I'm sure. After, what is it now, 5 weeks, I think we've been on work from home. It's getting a bit crazy, but we're hanging in there. And we're ready to start another week with this podcast episode. So let's get into the business. Tony, I want you to, if you can, take us through just a bit of a high level of what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, my pleasure. So today we really want to talk about how we're going to be versioning the Meraki Dashboard API. And in order to sort of contextually understand where we're coming from, the Meraki Dashboard API, which is a REST-based API, has been around for quite a while now. However, it wasn't until recently that we started to what's called semantically version the API.
Whoa.
And there's a whole host of reasons why that's important. And we're going to get right into the meat of that. But that is sort of the fundamental change that we've made over the course of the last few months here, is to start to speak to our developers, our users, our consumers in versions. And most of you are familiar with this concept as it pertains to things like your iOS or Apple releases or Android releases. We often hear them coming out with, hey, the new version of the software. And of course, also things like applications themselves and both major and minor versions. And we're really going to talk about how we've done this at Meraki, why we've done this, so the why behind the what, and have a really interesting discussion around that.
So before
Corey, feel free if you want to add anything. Oh, go ahead, Simon.
Well, I was just going to say, before we get too much into this, let's go super high level for our listeners, those who are perhaps less familiar with the whole API thing. I know we've covered it on a couple of episodes, but maybe just give us a quick recap. What is the API story at Meraki, and what is the Dashboard API as part of that specifically? And then I think we'll be ready then to dive into a little more detail.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. So absolutely, taking a step back, the Dashboard API is really really the programmatic counterpart to our user interface, the dashboard. And many of you, of course, use this day in and day out. This is where you can sign in, go to dashboard.meraki.com, and start viewing and interacting with your Meraki devices around the world. Whether you're managing switches, access points, security appliances, or cameras, as well as mobile devices. And the idea with the API is that over the course of especially the last few years, the market's really shifted towards automating and network programmability. And that is the what, and the how is the API, which stands for Application Programmable Interface, and allows for you to communicate through a system or through an application, or what we often refer to as an API client, rather than a human typing and clicking, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And so that's really what we're going to talk about today, is the Dashboard API and how we've sort of enriched that experience over the course of the last 6 months or so.
Cool.
Yeah. And just to add on a little bit to that, so, I came from a systems engineering background with Meraki, and we were commonly using the Meraki for most of our customer requirements. But it started getting a little bit challenging with the enterprise and service provider customers who had, various levels of automation sort of baked into their operations, as well as they were dealing with a higher volume of employees and vendor equipment. And so they were commonly asking for very specific controls that they could make with the Meraki system without always having to go through the dashboard. And that's kind of where the API started really taking, its shape. And it was a lot of these requirements to really start addressing these specific controls that the API became really a forefront. And now we're wanting to, we've embraced that so much so that we've had to, think about versioning due to the rate of the developments on that.
That's perfect. Actually, I'm going to chime in here. Corey and Tony, can you guys shed some light on how many customers are using the Meraki Dashboard API today?
Sure. So we, as you know, Melissa, we look at this very closely, and at a high level, we found that currently, when we look at the dashboard user interface and compare that to how many customers are also relying on the API in some form, we measure that in monthly active users. That's a very industry standard way of looking at, did Jane use the API in the last 30 days, so to speak? And that number, or that ratio, is right around the 18 to 20% mark. So what that means is that for all of our customers, roughly 18 to 20% are also using the Dashboard API in addition to the dashboard user interface, which is pretty staggering. I mean, that number has grown immensely. To Corey's point, the sort of rate of adoption of the API is part of what's leading us to talk now about the need to version and why that's becoming more and more critical for our developer experience out there.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so let's I guess jump into that then. Why are we taking this opportunity to reversion at the Dashboard API?
Sure. So I'll start it off and hand it to Corey to give some more depth. But really, it goes back to what I was saying, which is over the course of the last three and a half or so years, the API, the REST API service has expanded. It's really ballooned. And that's an exciting thing for us. We've got over 350 what are called endpoints, which are the sort of analog to that in the user interface is a checkbox or something that you can configure or interact with. And usually those are grouped by a sort of device or product or what we call service group. But the point here being that we've really massively broadened and expanded what you can do with the API. And not just for configuring devices or inputting settings, but also for our customers to be able to run really comprehensive reports and perform monitoring as well is an area that we've seen growing massively. But because of that investment, so to speak, in the breadth of coverage, it started to become really difficult for our developer audience out there just to keep track of all of the enhancements we're making, all of the changes we're making, all of the patches we're making. And this fundamentally is why best practices in software and in API development really says that you should version. And it's really simple in a way. It's a frame of reference for each and every user and each and every customer out there to say, okay, the last time I took a look at what was covered, what was supported, what was enhanced, and what features were there was version X. And now I'm coming back and looking again, and Meraki's on version X+1, right? Whatever that deviation was, right? And that is sort of a really important and helpful frame of reference for our customers and users out there.
Yeah, okay, makes sense. What are the main core changes the team is making under the hood then for that reversioning?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So there are several things that we really incorporated into the changes. Now, in order to do a breaking change, first of all, you have to do a major and the semantics. So basically, if we're at version 0, by going to version 1, we're signaling that there are going to be some significant changes to the interface, which includes changing the paths, right? Effectively the API that you're calling, or its URL path, and we also need to figure out how we can change certain responses so that they are more consistent. And so, with these sort of being some of the issues that we wanted to address, we took a lot of time to effectively reorganize these 300 plus endpoints that we had into a really sensible sort of path structure. So think of it as like a well-organized, file folder structure. Whereas before it was just, a couple of folders with a whole bunch of files. And so with that structure allows our developers to find the resources that they need to use to monitor or configure their network. But it also helps our own engineers build consistent services so that everyone is on the same page. And as always, it becomes very Meraki simple. We much like a intuitive interface, and that's not just with our graphical dashboard, but that's also with the programmatic interface. So those are some key changes. Tony, did you want to add anything else?
Sure. Yeah, I would say, generally speaking, there have been an immense amount of what we refer to as enhancements. So these are additive changes that have been made to the current major version of the API. And we'll get more into this, but as Corey mentioned, since the dawn of time on Meraki's Dashboard API, we've been on major version 0. But behind the scenes, or under the hood, that major version 0, and many of you seen this, right, is 0 dot and then a number. We're, technically speaking, we've made hundreds of changes, but it wasn't until recently that we actually started incrementing what's called the semantic minor version. So think of it as 0 dot and then a number. That's the minor version. And if we were to wind back the clock well to before we started actually speaking in terms of semantic versions, we would be at 0 dot probably hundreds, right, Corey? Easily hundreds. But it wasn't until recently that we actually started incrementing that number and communicating in this sort of new way. And it's very typical for API providers to bump that number anytime they make a new release, which includes typically additive or enhancement changes to the API. Separately, there has been work that our group has done to start preparing us for a new major version. And that is exactly what Corey was speaking to here. And that is done for really one reason and one reason only. It is to release not only just a completely new, call it major experience to the API, but it's to allow the provider, in this case Meraki, to actually make what are referred to as breaking changes. Now, the reason that this is very important is because we, as a provider, have committed to every developer out there in the world that we will not break or make what are called breaking changes to the API's experience. And there's a finite list of what are considered breaking changes. But the context behind this is that we have thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of API clients that have been built to integrate with our service. So we have to make sure that we continue to deliver a backwards compatible experience. The moment that we go in and make any sort of breaking change, just like the path changes that Corey, for example, described, without incrementing our major version. That will really upset our customers, understandably, because it means that overnight we would, in theory, push a change that would actually bring down any integration that's reliant on the declarative design and structure of the API. And that's sort of the area that the major versioning exercise comes in around, if that makes sense.
Definitely. And that makes sense, it sounds like, for like the rollout of V1. But what about breaking changes in folks who would migrate from what we're on now to the new version? Does versioning to V1 break things for folks who are already using the Dashboard API in 0.9, for example?
Yeah, this goes right back to that intent and being really sort of intentional about where we are by way of version. So absolutely, any developer, and for example, Corey, he's built many hundreds of clients and integrations on top of API version 0. What we are signaling to the world by our soon-to-be transition to version 1 is that developers are going to need to go back in and dissect their clients' software and make sure to transition their software to version 1. This is why it's important that providers in general don't do this all too often. They only really do it on an as-needed basis, and we've held off, to be honest, as long as we could as we sort of built out this product, this experience. But now we've sort of gotten to that point where we need to make enough of those structural changes, path changes, output changes that are breaking to sort of make it to where it's time for us to actually communicate this out to our developers, make sure that they know that it's coming, and in depth detail the documented changes that they're going to be needing to sort of build upon. So it's absolutely sort of us coming to the market, coming to our developers and saying, hey, we do need to version the service. Here's the why, and of course we'll talk about that here. But experientially for the developer, that means they now need to move their clients over in order for them to sustainably work on the next version of the API. And again, this is pretty common or standard, but it does mean that there's some work that has to be done by our developers and integrators out there.
I actually have a quick question on this one, Tony. Just wondering, I can imagine if there are folks listening who are already extensively using APIs, and this kind of stuff might make them a little anxious. Change always does when you're in this kind of game. So what kind of communication plan are we thinking about for making sure that we get the word out in good time and everybody gets to hear it?
Yeah, so we've thought deeply about this, and this is one of the reasons we have architects like Corey and Shay and others on the team, because they think really deeply and sort of echo the voice of the developer. Before I answer that, Simon, there are really sort of two personas, right, within the developer world. There are, call it brownfield or seasoned developers that are familiar with Meraki and have already developed intellectual property and software clients on Meraki's APIs. Of course, you're absolutely right that we want to be extra mindful about those users. And there's, the answer in that area is, while we are going to be announcing as well as promoting to this new V1 of the service, which absolutely will have modifications to it fundamentally, that doesn't mean to say that we're going to pull the carpet out from under every one of our developers and give them this sort of very short time scale. In fact, our intent when we release and announce version 1 is to continue in parallel to support and continue to run both version 0, our current version, as well as version 1, which in the coming months or two will be promoted concurrently. So everything will continue to work and nothing will change about how those function and how those are supported. We will be giving developers a minimum of 18 months, but we have not yet set a sunset date. Sunset is the moment at which we not only communicate that the service no longer is running, but that we actually shut it off. So we haven't actually even set that date yet. We're going to have a significant amount of time where we continue to sustain and support both. Now, for the greenfield developer, which is that other persona that is equally important, this is less of an issue, and there is no reason why once we come out with version 1, right, and promote that a developer wouldn't jump on that bandwagon. Because ultimately, as we've already mentioned, we have in all ways, shapes, and facets made the version 1 experience improved. That is fundamentally sort of the goals behind this new version of the API, is make it more discoverable, make it easier to use, make it more user-friendly from a developer standpoint, and it's going to be more feature-rich. So there's ultimately, if you're coming brand new to the table, Simon, and you're saying, hey, I'm gonna write a new client today, by the time we promote version 1, that's the way you want to go. And that's what we're going to recommend and signal as part of our communications. But we want to be really thoughtful about that brownfield developer, that seasoned developer that already has built clients. Does that make sense?
Makes total sense. And I'm so glad we're thinking about that, because it's, I think if you don't look at this stuff every single day, and you're just happy that your network is working and you don't want to touch anything, this is the thing which is going to make you a little nervous, I imagine. And I remember this from my network engineering days. There are certain networks that you absolutely are happy to be experimenting with and changing stuff, running the latest code. But then you've also got those folks who want to make sure that they've got, so their mission critical stuff is very well baked, and they have plenty of time to plan their any changes that they need to make. So that sounds good.
Absolutely, yeah. And Corey, I mean, chime in here, because like I said, we've talked about this at length within the team, and he is one of those developers with many clients behind it as well.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I have a lot of services and tools. Again, as I was helping my customers as an SE, I was building a lot of either like proof of concept, solutions, or, simple scripts that would help them deploy, their newly, acquired network at scale. And so I'm not eager to, rewrite a lot of those scripts that may just be sitting in a GitHub, repository, collecting dust until that one moment when I need it, and I don't necessarily want to have to rewrite it. So, there's a decision around, supportability, and then when do we just kind of turn it off? And so, we're not eager to turn it off, because I'm not eager to turn it off, as at least one vote. And beyond that, but going forward, as I were to build new solutions, new scripts, I'm naturally going to want to use V1, as a developer. And that's because it's going to have the newest endpoints. There were over 150 changes, at least, to the new version, as well as all new future developments will be within this space. And so, obviously from, new features, but also there was a lot of efficiency improvements where we return, more data as opposed to a very limited set where you're having to call the API at multiple times. So instead, we'll return, like, say, an array of results, just generally making the experience faster for everyone. And then on kind of another angle, with these improvements and enhancements, we were able to also build a lot of really helpful utilities and reinvest in utilities that have already been helpful to our developers. And that's things like our interactive API documentation, as well as our Postman collection, which is basically like a graphical tool to interact with REST APIs. And so we have basically mirrored this Postman collection to match our interactive API documentation, giving you two ways of discovering and leveraging the API, as well as Postman in itself is much like a calculator to an accountant. It's always on their desk. And if they need to run some numbers, double check something outside of, say, a spreadsheet, it comes in really handy to sanity check. And so we wanted to make sure our Postman collection was robust and really well documented to aid in the development, whether you're someone new to the experience or if you're a seasoned veteran just looking for references.
Actually, I want to quickly jump in there on Postman. I have limited experience on this. I'm definitely a newbie on this side of the Meraki house, but I did find Postman was actually quite good fun to play with. You can just, it is exactly like you said, Corey. It's like having a calculator on your desk. It's just a handy tool that you can just test and see what the output is based on the input you put in. So for anybody who wants to sort of experiment and get into this for the first time, that's a pretty good way to do so, right?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's one thing to be writing in Python or JavaScript or whatever your language is, but sometimes your code has bugs in it. And sometimes it's just nice to just run the API call without you mucking around. And so, having that kind of that static collection off to your, side there as a tool is super helpful. I discovered it early on when I was, learning about, Internet of Things and APIs, and I didn't necessarily want to write code. I just wanted to use the API, and it's much like a web browser, discovering the World Wide Web, but instead I'm discovering it through API endpoints instead of web addresses. I definitely encourage anybody who's new to the API space to have Postman as like one of the first things that they install.
Awesome. And actually, Corey or Tony, can you share some examples of some cool projects you've seen with the API and maybe what stack or whether those projects are in Postman or up on our Developer Hub Explore page for folks who are looking for maybe some projects to take on while they're at home or to get started with?
So there's a couple of cool projects. There is a collection of demonstrations and user-submitted content on the Meraki IO website, where our developer hub, and we collect all of these samples. For an example, one sample is a switch swapper, where you can go on site and imagine you are a service technician, and you needed to swap out a switch that may have gotten damaged because someone dropped their coffee on it. And so now you have a broken switch. And so all you need to do is just go into that server room, take a picture of the switch serial number, and have the system swap that configurations out. Pull in the new inventory that you're going to be replacing it with, and then push those switch port configurations and any settings automatically into the new setup. Now, you could do this on the Meraki dashboard, and you could, make all these changes, and there's even the ability to clone within inside of the dashboard. But you would have to allow maybe some third-party technician access to the dashboard directly to make those changes. But if you wanted to, say, abstract that to ensure a secure configuration and that they couldn't do anything outside of that scope, well, then you build your own custom application. And so that's what a service provider had asked me to do as one example. And so I built a simple workflow that allowed you to insert the serial number of the device, and it performs the automation of swapping out those switch configurations with just a few clicks of a button. So that's one example. Tony, do you have any fun examples you want to share?
Yeah, I would say one that we came across a few months ago is an open source solution that one of our technologists created called the Meraki VPN map. And for those interested in taking a look or following along with us as you're listening to this, you can go to meraki.io/explore, which is where you'll see all of the various projects that we've uncovered and have promoted as a solution built on the Meraki APIs. But this one in particular, the API VPN map, which is built on a Node.js server framework, what it does is effectively create a visualization of all your VPN connections across the World Wide Web and across the physical world, and shows you in both real time and historically how those are connecting. And it's a sort of really cool take on how you can visualize your VPN environment. It also adds some utilities that allow for you to check connectivity. And really now more than ever, VPN, as many of you know, is absolutely mission critical. It's how each of us are able to continue to do our jobs. Those of us fortunate enough that we can work from home. VPN has sort of gone under the scope. And so this tool is one that's grown in popularity, and we theorize largely because of the current situations. And so that's a really neat one that we've seen come out in the last few months, Melissa.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely relevant for our teleworker situation right now. Absolutely. Okay, cool. So you've talked a lot about the the transition plan or what folks should be thinking about if they are currently using the Dashboard API and moving over to V1 once it's released, and greenfield developers how to start looking at this or start thinking about this when they do get programming. Is there a way for folks to get more involved in this process or give feedback or impact the direction we're going?
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the things that we definitely would be remiss not to mention here is for those interested in not just following along, but also getting an opportunity to contribute and an early test and access this new version. Corey and the team will very soon actually be releasing the beta experience around V1. And the answer to your question there is the Meraki Early Access Developer Program. Now, this is a community of developers that is sort of coming together to, as I said, contribute to, test, and experience or kick the tires, so to speak, on new developer experiences, our new version 1 system, and any new features that are coming and will be released to this community before the general public. And so to get to that, the easiest way is to sign up through meraki.io/early-access. And that will get you to a very quick submission form where we'll get a few details about who you are, what you do, and what your preferred languages are. And from there, we'll onboard you to the program so that you can help contribute to the future, not just of V1, but other things coming down the line.
Give us that one again, Tony.
Of course, yeah, Meraki, meraki.io/early-access.
Perfect. And what might be some of those things coming down the line, or what do you guys see as the next frontier for the cloud platform or API services?
So I'll speak a little bit to V1. So obviously, some of you might be scratching your head and thinking, version 1, wouldn't that be the first? But actually, technically, version 0, when it comes to semantic versioning, is the first major version. And so as we've talked about, version 1, which will include, as we've talked about, lots of fundamental changes, far more consistency, and an improved developer experience across the service. And when we sort of release this, it will not only include a bunch of new functionality, but it'll include a completely new structure to how you interact with it through documentation, through your Postman collections, and even through a completely sort of redesigned Python SDK experience. This has been hand-built, hand-curated by Shay, one of our architects on the team, and really nicely complements version 1 because it means that you can go in and instantiate or call functions within Python in a very sort of human readable, human elegant way. And that's going to really fast track how our engineers, network administrators, IT operators out there can start to approach network programmability in a sort of we've lowered the barrier of entry is what we've really tried to do here. So that's something that you'll see us releasing very soon, along with the version 1 product. And lastly, and this is where I really want to tip the hat to Corey here, is a completely new and redesigned documentation experience, which it's important to call out is really the presentation layer of an API. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of endpoints and technical mumbo jumbo. The documentation is what's critical for an API and the developer's experience around it.
Perfect. And, before we started recording, we were on video and I saw that you actually were wearing a hat. So that literal tipping of the hat, I'm sure, went out for Corey.
Yeah, and Corey, I'd love to, anything you want to talk about there around V1, and then we can talk about what's to come for sure.
Yeah, again, I'm just really excited about getting V1 out there. I personally now use it as a default just because it's so much easier to use. I personally have to, build solutions using our APIs as much as I am also looking at our APIs. And so when it's just, a joy to use, I tend to be able to be more productive. And then, beyond just, the documentation and the utilities, just looking a little bit further ahead, we've been primarily focused on the configuration endpoints. So we're trying to get as much parity with the ability of making changes to your Meraki equipment. So configuring your wireless networks or applying firewall rules. Now, once V1 is out there, we're going to be focusing a lot more on the reporting elements, right? So I would like to monitor the network. And that could actually take two shapes or forms. It could be the REST form, so our dashboard API, where you make a request and say, give me all of the clients that have joined my network over the past 2 hours. Or give me the status of my devices. Are they online or are they offline? Well, that works really well for sort of populating a dashboard or generating a one-off report. But when it comes to, say, SLA management or just the sheer amount of data that you're trying to monitor, and it doesn't make sense to always ask for it, that's where we pivot to more event-driven systems. And that's things like our webhook alerts, where we send you the data regarding an uplink that has failed, as opposed to you having to ask for it every couple of minutes. So we'll be putting a lot more energy in that kind of area. But there's also other telemetry or push-driven types of information that we can send you, things like our scanning API or our location services, where we can tell you the location of your wireless clients or your Bluetooth beacon devices, and also pull out information like telemetry. So its battery, its temperature, things like that are in the future. Tony, is there anything else you want to add on that?
No, I think that was perfectly explained. A great analogy here that is familiar is, we all have mobile apps. We probably have tens, dozens, hundreds of them perhaps. And really the distinction here is when, and if some of you out there will remember this, when we started to see the shift towards push notifications. It's a really, it'd be really annoying if, for your SMS and your text messaging or your messaging apps, in order for you to consume new information, you'd have to open that app every time and say, oh, Melissa just texted me 3 minutes ago, or Simon just messaged me 2 hours ago. And so what Corey described here is how we're going to be maturing this experience for developers so that in addition to being able to comprehensively ask us for information when it matters, and a lot of times that's if you're loading your own front-end application or you're doing some, sort of time-sensitive scripting, which is ideal for configuration. We want to also now really mature the experience with our webhooks. And that means that you can sort of select, so to speak, how you want to get the information. And for anything that's stateful, so a switch port going from down to up, or an access point going offline, we've already invested in webhooks, but you're going to continue to see us really add and add some horsepower behind development around our push-based notifications, just like how you now can get notifications for your messaging apps, if that makes sense.
Definitely. Okay. And so for folks wanting to get early access to that kind of, those kind of services, the early access program, the community is the place for that as well, right? For those beta programs.
Absolutely. Yep. And we will be, we've really not just invested in this version 1, but we have moved to, as we've talked about, just to summarize, versioning minor releases of our API as well. And just to set expectations with our listeners out there, every month we will now be cutting a new release. So each month you can come in right at the start of the month and see all the new features, all new functionality that's on our changelog at meraki.io. But in addition to that, for those members of the early access community, we will be doing a weekly release of new beta functionality. And that audience are going to be easily able to consume just the absolute latest versions, new features, new functionality before that next month's release, if that makes sense. So it's 4 releases of beta and then 1 release of generally available versions of the API.
I kind of wondering as I'm listening to all of this, I'm thinking something that Melissa touched on earlier on. There's a lot of people out there right now, of course, in a home-based situation, and they might have some Meraki gear. They might want to be playing around with some of that, and maybe they haven't tried any of this stuff before. Do we have any sort of literally starting from scratch, put little tests or bits of code that they can play with to just start to gain some familiarity and confidence with this stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So DevNet is the developer arm of Cisco, and they have built a tremendous amount of learning labs as well as an associate program for becoming more programming focused when it comes to network management. So the basics to Python, the basics to REST API, the basics to JSON, and then you start building on these components to start building real solutions or real tools that you can start using in your everyday life. On top of that, it turns out I think Raspberry Pis are being sold like no other in these very special times, because everyone's like, oh, now I have a few days to kind of hack around with this project. And you can start building cool projects with the Meraki APIs on a Raspberry Pi, and that'll keep you busy for a few days.
Nice. Melissa, was there any other questions around the that we got from the community for the show?
I think we've touched on the major ones here. So we've talked about some cool projects and what's next, and especially how to get access.
Okay.
But we're happy to continue the conversations on the community. So I'll go ahead and when this podcast is live, I'll post it. And if folks want to add additional questions, we're happy to keep the conversation going on those threads.
Yeah, I think that would be awesome. And that's the thing that I'm really keen for us to try to do, because I know that this is something where for a lot of the folks out there, I think it's going to be like a confidence building exercise, just getting up to the point where they feel happy to jump in and have a go with all of this. And so the community is a great place to, just talk about that, to just let people know, what you're struggling with, what doesn't make sense to you, and just, let's level up our knowledge together. It seems like a nice way of doing things.
Definitely.
Well, it's been a pretty technical conversation today, but a lot of good stuff, and I like what I'm hearing around this versioning. It sounds to me like it's going to make it much easier for folks out there to really keep on top of what changes are coming, what changes have been made, so that there maybe are new hooks that can be taken advantage of for building new exciting software applications. We've covered quite a few of these on the shows we've done about APIs. If you go back through the archive, you'll find I think we have now 2 or 3 episodes we've done where we've talked to real customers who have taken those APIs and essentially created a business model or a service out of those capabilities. So we know it's real, we know it's out there, and obviously we're super keen to see more of it, because we do firmly believe that that's the future. It's certainly where we're investing a lot of our energy, as you're hearing from the folks on the podcast today. Okay, so before we wrap things up, I'll just do a quick round the room. Sort of any closing comments. Thank you very much, folks, for joining in on the podcast today. And so for our special guests, Melissa, thank you very much for popping some of those questions.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Corey, good luck over there in the Netherlands. And thanks a lot for staying on. It's a bit later in the day for you, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure.
And of course, Mr. Carmichael, thank you very much again for taking us through some of the details today.
Thanks so much, Simon. Thanks for having us, and thanks to each of our listeners out there. We really appreciate your subscribership and look forward to interacting with you more on the community.
I couldn't say it better myself. And so really that's the place to go. Go to the community. Let's keep the conversation going. For Meraki Unboxed, we're going to wrap this episode up now. But if you would like to see an idea of yours done on the show, be that about our networking products, our smart cameras, the APIs, of course, that we've been talking about today, my ears are very open. I'm very excited about having more engagement and getting either you on there or just us talking about what you would like to hear us talking about. So the community obviously is one place you can do that. The other place is to reach out to me directly. You can do that on Twitter with @MerakiSimon is my handle on Twitter, and I would love to hear from you. Just let me know what you think of the show, how we can improve it for you, and any topics you would like to get covered. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up for this show. I think it's been certainly a pretty deep, heavy one, but we've covered a topic which is super important and one which we really do believe is very much indicative of the direction that a lot of networking is going as we start to automate more and more of our capabilities. So thanks again for listening. We'll be back again in a couple of weeks. Very much look forward to that, and stay safe out there. We'll see you back here very soon. Bye for now.